Gut, ich höre, wir sind zu sehen und zu hören. Schönen guten Abend. Herzlich willkommen zum Open Mind Festival, Teil 3 unserer kleinen Gesprächsreihe, die Natur gehört, mit dem wir heute diese Reihe auch abschließen werden. Wir haben am Freitag über das Konzept der Biokratie gesprochen mit Christine Ax, haben am Samstag mit Silke Helfrich über das Thema Commons gesprochen und werden heute über Aktivismus sprechen, und das werden wir tun auf Englisch. Wir werden heute den ganzen Talk auf Englisch führen. Wir haben heute Gäste aus Belgien und aus Ecuador da, und wir haben uns entschieden, dass das doch wirklich die eleganteste und einfachste Lösung ist, diesen Talk einfach auf Englisch zu machen. Gleich switchen wir aufs Englische. Vorher aber noch kurz der Hinweis. Wieder mal natürlich, die Reihe ist gesponsert oder gefördert von der Österreichischen Gesellschaft für politische Bildung. Sehr vielen Dank dafür. Und wir kooperieren heute mit Südwind Salzburg, die bei uns in der Arge sind, direkt neben unserem Büro, ihr Büro haben. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass wir eine Co-Moderatorin heute haben, nämlich Anita Rötzer von Südwind Salzburg. Anita, du darfst dich gerne dazuschalten und kurz Hallo sagen. Da bist du. Hallo. Genau, Südwind. Vielleicht magst du ganz kurz erzählen, was Südwind macht, bevor wir in den Talk einsteigen, damit jeder Bescheid weiß, woran er oder sie gerade ist.
Hallo. Danke, das mache ich gerne, und ich bin davon ausgegangen, dass wir sofort mit Englisch starten. So that's why I will just decide to switch to English in this moment. So I'm working for Südwind. Südwind is an NGO for developmental policy making and global justice. We're an NGO in Austria since founded back to 1979, so over 40 years. We're active in Austria, in 7 different regions of Austria. And our main issues are awareness rising on issues like social responsibility, fair trade, unfair trade, global learning, global citizenship education, all these big terms also having to do with the so-called SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which have topics like climate change, migration, actually topics which every one of us has to deal with in his or her daily life. And one part is also a very obvious part is consumption, that we consume a lot of products coming from all over this world, and we would like to raise the question, ask people to think about it. How is each of us actually linked to other people in this world? So that's very obvious, consumption, but there are a lot of other situations happening in this world, happening on a local basis, on a local behavior, but having a great global impact. So we would like to show these global interactions and connections. Südwind does this through various approaches. If it's for little kids, children, pupils, students, also adults, we have workshops, seminars, or also events and talks like this one, this evening. And we would also like to raise the question, whatever is going on in this world, where's the linkage to each of us, and what is our contribution? What do I have to do with everything what's going on? And this is also why we're very happy that AG Kultur invited us to have this cooperation. Thanks to you, Sebastian, especially. And because a lot of topics addressed in this Open Mind Festival are a lot of topics that Südwind has been dealing with throughout the last decades. So we are very happy to have this cooperation this evening. And before I give my word back to you, Sebastian, I'd also like to thank 2 other organizations who made this evening possible for us. We contributing to a guest from Ecuador, who we will introduce later, but I'd like to say thanks to our other cooperation partner Intersol and Grupo Sal, who shared the contact with our guests from Ecuador. Thanks so far.
Thank you, Anita, for introducing Südwind to all of you out there. I'm switching as well to English, but before we go into the talk, again, this Zoom conference is streamed live via YouTube, so you have the chance by going onto YouTube to chat with us, to ask questions, which we will hopefully answer later in the talk by writing into the chat of YouTube. So if you have any questions to our guests tonight, just be so kind and write them down, and we'll come back later to that while we are talking with our guests. And yeah, well, so that's the point where we start introducing the guests. We have seen, or some of you have seen, the performance Pleasant Island just before this talk by Silke Husmans and Hannes Terrer, and we'll welcome both performers now who are sitting in Belgium. Welcome Silke and welcome Hannes. You can join us now.
Hello.
Hi, Sebastian.
Hello. We have seen your performance, or at least some of our visitors have seen them, and some of them will watch it later, but we will first of all make a little artist talk with you both about the work, and later we will have our second guest, but we'll introduce her now, which is Patricia Gualinga, and she is sitting in Ecuador. So if you would join us now, Patricia, and with her there's also Doris Bankhammer. She will translate this talk from English into Spanish, and when Patricia is speaking in Spanish, she will translate it to everybody in English. I hope it will work. We had a little difficulties to get this work, but it will definitely work during the talk. Hello, Pati, to Ecuador.
Hola. Hola.
Okay. Maybe Anita, you can tell us a little bit more about Patricia Gualinga in first place, and then we can start the talk with Silke and Hannes, or do you like to do it the other way around?
That's fine, this way. Patricia is actually on her field a very famous activist on environment and human rights. She lives in a village in Sarayaco, the village of Sarayaco in Ecuador. As far as I understood, this village is very remote and there are no roads leading there. So it's not that easy to reach this place, unless I think you can fly there or also take the water. She's a speaker of the Quechua community, and Patricia Gualinga has collected a lot of experience on local resistance on the local level, but also on the international level. And throughout all these years of activism, she has become a strong figure in the women's movement, always in the context regarding the protection of the Amazonian rainforest. Patricia Gualinga is, so to say, an ambassador in these topics. She's been speaking on world conferences like the UN Conference of Indigenous People in New York, or also at the climate summit in Paris. And today she's here to tell us from her side, from her first sides, how her experience is in all these difficult fights against exploitation and oil companies, governments, and I would actually like to stop here, and later on when we ask Patricia to speak, she will introduce a bit more on her person.
Okay, thank you very much, Patty, Doris, and Anita. And we'll go into the talk with Silke and Hannes first. Hello again to Belgium. Hope you're fine. Sadly, you couldn't join us tonight in person in Salzburg due to the known reasons. So we shared your remarkable performance, Pleasant Island, on video. For those who haven't seen the performance, probably you can tell us a little bit what's going on there. What is it about, Pleasant Island? Where is Pleasant Island?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the invitation. We're very happy to be with you tonight, albeit in a virtual manner, but still, I think it means a lot. And yeah, to tell a bit more about Pleasant Island very shortly, it's a second piece that we're doing in a more long-term research on mining and on extraction of resources. Our first piece was a few years ago about a mining disaster that happened in the south of Brazil where Silke grew up. And we continued this research, and last year made a piece called Pleasant Island, which was shown tonight, as you mentioned. And it's a documentary piece. So it's a documentary theater piece in which we translate a lot of conversations that we had to the theater space. And for this, we did a research about the island of Nauru, which is a very small remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which has a very not a rich history, but a very troubling history and a relationship with mining. Under colonization, the whole island was mined out, which led to a huge economic crisis, as some of you might have seen in the performance. And this led to the situation today where the island of Nauru is, in exchange for money, hosting refugees on the island. That's very short, but.
Why is it mining, which is your topic? You're talking, you made mining stories like some years ago, then you make Pleasant Island. What's that about with mining and you, both of you? Why is that your topic of choice?
I think to link to what Anita said before, mining is linked with consumption as well. And as we are over-consuming, we are causing more mining disasters and more exhaustion, natural exhaustion of the world. And I think it's a very important topic to talk about, because all the things that you see around you, like your table and your sofa behind you, everything is made by resources, and these resources are coming from somewhere. And that's why we think it's an important topic to talk about. Mining.
So you went there to visit the island Nauru. You did that last year, as I remember, when I remember correctly, and you talked with the people there. What I find very strongly about your work is that you both of you remain silent, and you give the stage or the word to the people of Nauru. And they're in a situation where mining has completely destroyed their island, and where it's not possible for them to have some kind of agriculture. They just rely on exports or imports from Australia, actually, and from other countries. Is there any kind of, because we're talking about activism today, is there more like a resignation under the population of that island, or is there kind of any kind of protest activism against this situation?
That's a good question. And I think, yeah, we can't speak for the people of Nauru, but we talked with a lot of them, and they compare themselves with the island of Kiribati. Kiribati is almost gone, like it's the ocean is how do you say, taking it over?
The ocean levels are rising.
And it's an island nearby, and these people from Kiribati, they fight. They are still fighting for their island, while the Nauruans, they themselves call them more like you said, like the resignation syndrome, like they are not fighting anymore, because I think it's what they told us. It's like they feel like they don't have the power to change anything, or so in Nauru it's more like there is not so much protest going on.
Yeah, and I think you raise an important point also as far as mining is concerned. Once extraction starts and natural resources are depleted and are extracted and the profit goes elsewhere, then more often than not, people become dependent on something entirely else. They're not self-sufficient anymore. They become dependent on an economic system of trade and imports. And in the case of Nauru, this paradoxically is a trade relationship that they have with the country of Australia, which was the colonizing power at the time that started the mining industry on behalf of the British Commonwealth. They were administering the mining operation. So this is a very paradoxical relation.
Yeah, what I remember, I saw that performance of you last year, just a year ago in Munich, and the punchline of all the things you're telling or letting the people from there tell us is that now they have sold their coastlines to a deep sea mining company who is digging there for all rare earth elements to kind of make the ecological turnaround at the energy market possible. So there is, again, the story of mining out every resource which you can find there, actually, which makes this small island, which is a kind of like, what did you say, 5 to 4 kilometers, very, very small, 20 square kilometers small island, turns that into a huge metaphor of the whole world, actually. Regarding your work, you're doing documentary theater, you said. Is there a point you went there, you talked with the people, you come back, you show their voices, you make sounds, videos? Is there by kind of dealing with those material, is there a moment when your work, your documentary style of working, transcends into a kind of activism?
That's a good question. I think in any case, what we try to do is open up the public discourse in a way, and our theater pieces are one proposition or proposal to do that, as many other people are doing. For example, Patricia is doing very much active in her own context. But I think when dealing with these topics, there's often a huge narrative hierarchy. Like, companies have more money to buy PR campaigns, to lobby on international governments, to lobby on policies that are being drafted. And I think what we try to do with our work is broaden that perspective and open up this public discourse for more voices, and to try and add as many perspectives and give them to the spectators in the theater space, or in this case in front of their computer, so that we don't necessarily try to make an opinion ourselves and say this is good, this is bad, but we try to give perspectives, and then the spectator can sort of has the responsibility to make up his or her own mind about this topic, and try to find a way to deal with this.
But the fact that we made a decision to go to an island that is so far and to go to Brazil, and this act is a bit of an activism move, I think, because we want to share stories that are unheard, and a lot of people doesn't know about Nauru or what is happening there or what is happening in Brazil. And the fact that we decide to go to these places and to do this long research, you could see it as a kind of an activism form, but not the real like Patricia.
It's on a different level.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but that's the reason why I asked it, because you could describe it as activism as well, because it takes a huge effort to go there. Actually, how long did you stay on the island?
Well, I don't know if the people know it. For the people who didn't see the piece, on Nauru there is a media ban, so journalists are not allowed to enter. So it was very difficult for us to enter, but after a while they decided to let us in, and we could stay for 3 weeks, which is very long for foreigners to go on the island. So 3 weeks.
3 weeks. And how many people do live there?
around 10,000 people.
That's much.
Yes.
Okay. So that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, somewhere northeast of Australia. And maybe we can then switch to the Pacific coastline of Ecuador then, and go into the talk with Patty, and we'll come back to you both later and get in talk with Patty and you both to broaden the perspective a little more. Thank you in first place for that. And
thank you.
You're welcome.
It's yours.
Patricia, would you like to introduce yourself, please, a bit emphasizing the points in your experience that you'd like to share with us, and maybe also giving us a brief story on what happened in 2002 when the fight against the big oil companies and the government started. What happened nearly 20 years ago?
Gracias, Anita. Gracias, Sebastián. Sarayaco es un pueblo indígena quichua de 1,200 habitantes que está en la selva amazónica de Ecuador y es conocido porque su lucha ha permitido que sea un símbolo de resistencia en estas tierras.
Hallo, Anita und Sebastian. Ich komme aus Sarayaco, Quichua, ein Dorf mit ca. 1200 Einwohnern im Amazonasgebiet von Ecuador. Sorry, English. Sorry. Hello, Anita and Sebastian. I'm from Sarayaco, Quichua. We have our village has 1,200 inhabitants, situated in the Amazonian region of Ecuador, and it has become the symbol of resistance due to the fight against these oil companies and the government.
En el año 2002, una petrolera ingresó de una manera arbitraria, violenta a nuestro territorio. Sarayaco se defendió y expulsó a la empresa petrolera de acá. Y luego de 10 años de juicio en una corte internacional, logramos una sentencia favorable al pueblo de Sarayaco.
In 2002, an oil company moved into our territory in a very violent and arbitrary way. But Sarayaco managed to drive them out again, and it took us 10 years at an international court to obtain a favorable sentence against the oil company.
Esto fue muy importante porque en esos años la gente pensaba que no se puede luchar contra una empresa petrolera. Y nosotros tuvimos una estrategia, dijimos, no podemos permitir que ingresen, porque si ingresan, nunca van a volver a salir. Y iniciamos a luchar desde el principio, porque no se les puede dejar ingresar. Ellos no vuelven a salir hasta que destruyen.
I think it has been very important because in those years, no one thought it possible to fight off an oil company. Our strategy was that we cannot let them in, because once they move in, you don't have any possibilities to push them out again unless they have destroyed and exploited everything. So the basic idea was, don't let them in.
La lucha ha sido por desigualdad de condiciones. Hubo militarización, utilizaron la fuerza pública. El gobierno estaba en contra de nosotros. Nos acusaron de terrorismo, pero logramos demostrar que todo eso era falso.
The fight was hard because it was in very unequal conditions. They had the military on the side, they had public security forces on their side. The government, Ecuadorian government was against us. They said we were terrorists. but we managed to demonstrate that we were doing the right thing.
Sin embargo, todavía queda tonelada y media de explosivos que están en una parte del territorio de Sarayaku como símbolo de muerte que dejó la empresa, y el Estado no cumple todavía la sentencia internacional que tiene que cumplir a favor de Sarayaku.
And yet there's still 1.5 tons of explosives left behind by the oil company as a symbol of their deathly action, and the state, the government of Ecuador has not yet fulfilled the conditions imposed by the international sentence.
Nosotros continuamos en estas tierras. La empresa no ha vuelto. Han intentado varias veces de convencernos de que es económicamente bueno, pero Sarayaku ha decidido que acá no ingresarán nunca las empresas petroleras, ni mineras, ni madereras. Por lo tanto, tampoco acepta que haya una carretera.
We are still on our own territory, and the company has not managed to move in. They tried to convince us that it was for our own benefit, that we would earn a lot of money, but we have decided that never ever any kind of big company is going to come to our territory, be it oil, be it mining, be it wood, forestry. That's why we don't accept that they build a road to our territory.
Hemos lanzado una propuesta nueva para el mundo que se llama la selva viviente, que trata de generar una conciencia global de por qué luchamos los pueblos indígenas, por qué es importante cuidar la naturaleza y la madre tierra.
We have launched now a new project, a new process. We call it the Living Forest. And we try to raise awareness on a global level what indigenous people can do and do, why we have to take care of nature, of Mother Earth.
Hemos resistido 528 años de colonización. Y vamos a seguir resistiendo. Estamos vivos. Y gracias a nosotros, a los pueblos indígenas, todavía existe la Amazonía. Y todavía se puede decir que hay un equilibrio en el planeta.
We have lived through 528 years of colonialization. And here we are, still resisting, still alive. And thanks to us, the indigenous people, there still is the Amazonas, there still is a certain balance in the world.
Eso es lo que puedo compartir.
That's what I wanted to share with you right now.
Thank you, Patricia. I was wondering, your kind of activism, if we compare it to that kind of activism we were just talking about in the first round, could you point out, I think your activism is really active. You really go out into the forest, on the street, and have some kind of method where you draw the attention by being strong and acting out loudly, if I understand correctly. Could you tell us, in your opinion, what do you think is the main aspects? What makes your activism so successful? What would you say are the main aspects that you can really make other people aware what's going on and getting them motivated to support you? What kind of style of activism would you say you support?
Porque nosotros dijimos no desde el inicio y no dejamos que nos destruyeran. Cuando entran las empresas te destruyen también la vida y el alma, no solo la naturaleza.
Well, our activism is that we said no right from the beginning, because once the companies move in, they not only destroy nature, they destroy yourself, they destroy your soul, all your being.
Nosotros somos naturaleza. Si destruimos nuestro hábitat, nuestro ecosistema, nos autodestruimos en todos los sentidos. Y ese es nuestro estilo de lucha. Luchamos con vida.
We are nature. If we destroy nature, we auto-destroy, or what we are doing is self-destruction. So our fight, our activism is life.
Mm-hmm. And before I hand over back to Sebastian, Patricia, what would you say? Why? What I found out so far is that the role of women is a very strong one in your movement. How did it occur? How did it happen that especially girls and women would get together? What about the men? In what way do they support?
Realmente la decisión radical de no extraer, de no destruir, nace de las mujeres. Las mujeres son las protagonistas principales de decir, aquí no ingresan. Es una decisión que nace desde lo femenino y es respaldado por los hombres en Sarajevo. Pero en la lucha de las mujeres amazónicas es la voz de las mujeres la que se escucha.
It's true. It were women above all who said no to extraction, no to destruction. The no comes basically from women, and our men support us. But the voice against the destruction of the Amazonas is mostly feminine.
La lucha de las mujeres le da fortaleza a la lucha de un pueblo. La lucha de las mujeres, hablado desde el sentimiento de las mujeres, le da algo diferente a una lucha que es patriarcal. Las industrias son patriarcales, los gobiernos son patriarcales. Por lo tanto, ahí es un estado patriarcal, una empresa patriarcal que destruye lo femenino. Y por eso la lucha de las mujeres es tan importante.
I do think that the fight of women is very important. It potentiates the fight of people. Women fighting give a different quality to the fight, as opposed to a patriarchal, a more patriarchal fight. Industry, governments are patriarchal, so they destroy feminine aspects. So it's so important that women fight in order to oppose these patriarchal structures and fights.
El modelo económico que ha hecho el mundo no es un modelo que incorpora a la mujer ni lo femenino. Es un modelo opresor, destructivo. Por lo tanto, eso hay que cambiar. Hay que empezar a volver a nacer con el corazón, desde la naturaleza con el corazón. Y ese aporte lo dan las mujeres, y por eso es muy importante la participación de las mujeres.
The economic system we have now in the world on a global level does not incorporate women, does not incorporate feminine aspects. It's oppressive, it's destructive. So it's so very important that we start again doing things from our heart in harmony with nature. And I do think that's the contribution the women from my region can make.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patricia, for that, for sharing us with that. I have a question, very simple question. How did you say no? And where did you say it? What did you do? how was this no to be heard? And by whom?
La respuesta es muy simple. Dijimos no, aquí no ingresan. Y lo dijo la Asamblea del Pueblo. Nosotros vamos a luchar en nuestras fronteras y para ingresar aquí tendrán que matar a todo el pueblo. Si no, no ingresan. Y ese no les pareció una locura a muchos, pero para nosotros era una decisión definitiva. Nos íbamos contra el Estado de Ecuador, contra el gobierno, las empresas, la fuerza pública y todos. Al inicio luchamos solo, después llegaron los aliados.
We decided to say no in the assembly of our community. And we decided that our no would be to fight on the borders of our territory. And if they wanted to move in, they would have to kill each and every one of us. Otherwise, they wouldn't come in. So this was the way our no was heard. Many people thought it was completely crazy at the beginning because we put ourselves up against the government, the industry, all the powerful structures, the military, the police. At first we were on our own, but with the time, our allies came and helped us.
Y nosotros sabíamos el poder que tiene que nuestra lucha sea visibilizada. Por lo tanto, lo primero que hicimos fue ir a los medios a pedirles que nos dieran un pequeño espacio. No querían. Pero insistimos tanto que empezaron a abrirnos sus puertas y empezamos a ser escuchados y nuestro pueblo ser conocido.
And we also knew that in order to gain power, we had to become visible. So from the start, we tried to convince media to give us some space to inform about us. At first, they didn't want to do that, but little by little, and due to being so insistent, finally, they offered us some space, and that's how we made known our agenda, made known who we are.
Y después, algún joven tenía una cámara, High 8 en esa época, y filmó todas las escenas de lo que estaba pasando acá, y realmente pudimos visibilizar haciendo videos documentales pequeños que hicieron los jóvenes. Ahora ya hay muchos videos de Sarayaco. Hay mucho interés en cómo este pueblo logró expulsar a la empresa, documentales que están participando en festivales. Ahora se ha visibilizado bastante.
Finally, we found someone who had a camera, an H8 then, and he started filming whatever was happening. And so we could show it to other people, make visible our fight. Young people were making a lot of videos. And finally, there was a lot of interest of how we had managed to put up a fight and to be victorious against so powerful enemies. And our videos now are shown at festivals because people are interested in finding out how we did.
Sarayaco es el primer pueblo indígena quichua de esta región que lanzó su página web. Logró instalar un internet satelital para estar conectado al mundo. Un pueblo que se aísla es un pueblo que posiblemente su lucha no es conocida, pero un pueblo que se conecta al mundo, muy a pesar de estar sin carreteras, sin los sistemas, es un pueblo que logra estar conectados como ahora.
And another thing Sarayaco did, we were the first Quechua community or village to have a web page and to have internet by satellite systems. Because I do think that a village that is isolated, a community that is isolated, will not be known. Nobody will know about our fight if we are isolated. While a village like us, connected to the world, not by road, but by internet, is known and our fight is known.
Okay, thank you for that. Again, that leads me to Silke and Hannes, because that's the main point which is missing on Nauru. They have not the visibility. They have no freedom of press. They have no internet there. That is one of the 3 points you mentioned, Patricia, for being successful in actively protesting against the oil companies, the political decision, which you did in your assembly, the will to really fight physically, and the visibility through media and through the internet. And it worked out. And we were talking on Friday, we were talking about the concept of biokratie, which just means that besides the human rights, there are rights of nature as equivalent to human rights. And we heard that your country, that Ecuador, is the only and first country to have this biocratical thoughts in its constitution. Is that also a result of your protest? Was that before? Or did your government change by having you in the country protesting that loud? It was a long question.
Bueno, sí, yo creo que Naura no es visible porque cuando entra una empresa, la empresa se convierte en gobierno y les vuelve muy dependientes. Se ha visto ya eso.
I do think that Nauru is not visible because the company moved in. And once the company moves in, it becomes the government. And it generates a high level of dependencies. I think we've already talked about that.
En espacios donde ingresan las empresas son espacios donde el Estado o el gobierno ya no gobierna más. Es la empresa transnacional que gobierna y maneja a su antojo. Y aquí también en Ecuador pasa eso, en otros sectores. Esta parte de nuestra Amazonía lo que ha hecho es no permitir ingresar y no permitir que la empresa gobierne, sino que haya un gobierno indígena que reclame derechos territoriales al gobierno nacional, que es el Estado de Ecuador.
Where a company moves in, a government doesn't govern anymore. It's the transnational companies who take over the government and do whatever they like. It does happen as well in Ecuador, but not in our territory in the Amazonas because we just didn't allow them to come in. We still have a government, an indigenous government that reclaims rights from the national Ecuadorian government to stay independent.
Yo creo que el gobierno de Ecuador no es mejor que el de Naura. Es un gobierno que también basa su modelo económico en extracción y destrucción, en petróleo, minería. Eso es su fuente de economía y tiene justificación para eso. Pero aquí la resistencia y la lucha de los pueblos es lo que permite demostrar que hay violaciones a derechos humanos, que permite que haya un juicio internacional. Lo siento, Dori.
No hay problema. The government of Ecuador is not better than the government of Nauru. The government of Ecuador also promotes extraction, destruction, promotes oil companies and mining, and thinks it's justified in doing so. Our resistance, the resistance of the people, shows that there are human rights violations in the process. And thanks to an international lawsuit, we have been able to demonstrate these violations of human rights.
But Patricia, You said that 10 years later, in 2012, the government was sentenced and had to give some kind of award to your people, to the people of Sarajevo. Did you say just now that they haven't really fulfilled what they were supposed to? So is that fight not over yet? Are you still fighting on that same case? Or is there something new coming up?
Sí, la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos sentenció al Estado de Ecuador por violaciones a derechos del pueblo de Sarajevo. El Estado ha cumplido lo más fácil, una parte, pero no cumple 2 puntos que son trascendentales para el destino de los pueblos indígenas.
Ecuador was sentenced by the Inter-American Court of Law due to violation of the rights of the indigenous people of our people. The government of Ecuador has fulfilled the easy part. They did what was easy to do, but there's still 2 main, very, very important points for the future of indigenous people they have not fulfilled yet.
Fue ordenado que extraigan la 1,5 toneladas de explosivos que están en una parte del territorio y que sanen esa parte. Ordenó que hagan una legislación adecuada sobre consulta previa que tiene que ver con el consentimiento de los pueblos indígenas. Y el Estado estos 2 puntos no lo ha podido cumplir.
The first point is the removal of 1.5 tons of explosives that a company left behind in order to redress and to repair the place where these explosives were stored. This is one point. And the second are new laws on consultation, previous consultation of indigenous people, and establishing the need of approval of projects by indigenous people before the companies start.
Nuestra lucha es importante porque hemos logrado crear una jurisprudencia en materia de derecho a nivel de la Corte Interamericana, del sistema interamericano.
Our fight is very important because thanks to the sentence of the Inter-American Court, we have set a precedence case, a special case, which will be important for all people in South and Middle America.
La sentencia está pendiente y seguimos presionando, pero igual hemos logrado que otros pueblos se levanten para luchar y defender el territorio.
Even though the sentence has not been completely fulfilled and we still have to keep up pressure, other peoples have risen in order to reclaim and to defend their own rights.
Una lucha exitosa como la de Sarajevo inspira y da, motiva a otros pueblos, les da fuerza a otros pueblos, les da esperanza. Y por eso es importante nuestra lucha, porque ha logrado eso, ha logrado que otros pueblos vayan, exijan sus derechos, defiendan su territorio y sepan que es posible.
A successful fight like ours inspires and motivates other people to do the same. We gave them hope. That's why what is so very important about our fight, that other people now have risen in order to claim their rights, to claim their territories.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you again for that. What I find very interesting is that we had on Friday this talk about this theoretical, more or less theoretical concept of biokracy, rights of the nature, and Ecuador was standing there as the only good example of having that put into the constitution. And now you tell a very different story. And that's, I think, the best example why it's very important to make every voice heard, also here in Europe, not only our voice. Which brings me back to Silke and Hannes. The question is, what could the people, maybe the people from Nauru, learn in their situation from a protest like Patricia's and the protest of the indigenous people of Ecuador? Is there any connection they could have to some of the strategies in the good example of Patricia? Or is the desperation so big that they cannot see any way of protesting or making their rights and their will visible in kind of that way?
I think it's a good question, but personally, I'm a bit hesitant to compare the two situations because, of course, they're in a completely different time frame. Whereas, because of all the work that Patricia and the Sarayaku community has been doing, as she said very clearly, they said, you will not enter, you will not put one shovel in the ground, which is, of course, a different context as to where Nauru, during colonization, mining began, and already the whole territory, 80% of the territory of the whole island was already mined out without the indigenous people there having a say in what was happening. So it's a bit difficult to compare, I think. Suki, do you have something to add? But as Patricia mentioned, that what she is doing is giving hope to many different communities all around the world, and this is crucial. And I also think it's crucial that as a global community, we stand behind these kinds of fights, because they, not only the Sarayaku, but many communities engaging in such fights are at the forefront of a very important dynamic in the whole world. And as she said, she's not only fighting for their community, but for the whole world. And it's, if you look at it from a distance, it's completely unfair that they have to do the work, but it belongs to the whole world. And I think it's critical that as an international community or as a global community, we stand behind these fights and the work that they're doing.
There is a first question to Patricia from the audience, and I would like to read it, probably. That's the best way. Dear Patricia, you told us that you all decided to risk your own lives for defending nature. How were you able to take such a fundamental decision? Where did you get the courage and the strength from? Good question.
Decidimos arriesgar la vida porque ya les dije al inicio que nosotros somos naturaleza también. O sea, si destruían la naturaleza, también nos destruían a nosotros. ¿De dónde sacamos el coraje y la fuerza? Fue de la naturaleza y del espíritu. Si destruimos eso, ya hubiéramos quedado sin fuerza. Entonces, todo está relacionado, interconectado y todo depende del uno del otro. Nosotros somos hechos de naturaleza.
Why would we risk our lives? Because we are nature. When they destroy nature, they destroy us. There is no difference. We cannot separate us. So, and also the courage to fight, the strength, we take it from nature, from the spirit. We are interconnected. Without nature, we are nothing. So this is where we get the courage, and that's why we fight, because we are one with nature.
Yeah, that's the big difference, as we also heard on Friday. In German law, there are humans on the one side and there are things on the other side. And nature belongs to the side of the things, as we tend to separate, us Europeans tend to separate those two things into different categories. And I would encourage everybody else to also write questions into the chat. Now you have the chance. So if you have any questions to Silke, Hannes, or Patricia, just write them down. Otherwise, we'll continue by asking. Do you, Hannes and Silke, have any questions to Patty from your perspective?
No specific questions. It's just a pleasure to hear her talk and to hear a story of a fight that made it possible to defend the territory against a big corporation and international politics, which is huge, I think, and which is a very inspiring story. Do you have a specific question?
Yeah, no, because it's very inspiring, because Hannes and me, we focus on situation where the disaster already happens. So it's completely, yeah, like the people fight for something that is already gone, and it's, yeah, maybe that's my question, how she would act when she would be confronted with a disaster or yeah, something like that.
Es difícil ponerse en el lugar como de la gente de Nauru, por ejemplo. Y la pregunta de qué podría hacer es, yo creo que volvería a recoger mis fuerzas para poder primero empezar a denunciar las cosas malas que están pasando allá.
Well, it is very difficult to put oneself in the place of Nauru people. But I think I would try to regain strength, maybe starting by telling what has happened, making people know, denounce what has happened.
Y aunque sea muy doloroso decirlo de esta manera, Nauru debería decir, nosotros somos el ejemplo de lo que no debe ocurrir.
And even though it must be terribly painful to say that, Nauru might say, we are the example of how things should not happen. We are the bad example.
Y gritarlo al mundo, decir, esto es lo que pasó y nos pasó a nosotros. Yo creo que la empresa empezaría también a pensarlo, o el gobierno, pero yo creo que deberían por lo menos visibilizarse en ese sentido y luchar. O sea, no, si no luchan no van a saber cuál va a ser el resultado y la consecuencia.
They should shout out loud to the world what has happened to them, what has been done to them. And maybe if they shout out loud, companies would feel like they had to do some kind of compensation, or governments. But unless they start fighting, they will never find out what will happen.
Thank you for your answer.
I'd like to ask Silke and Hannes something. it sounds like you had quite a close contact to those people you interviewed and you met in Nauru. Do you still have connections to them? Are you still somehow linked to each other? And what would you say is their mood, atmosphere at the moment? What are do they have some kind of motivation for future, or can you say something from your side how you would interpret their mood in this situation now?
You want to start or I start?
Yeah, maybe one thing we didn't talk about is that that Nauru now is surviving by hosting Australian refugees on their islands. That's the way they receive money, but this is also the way that are destroying the refugees and the Nauruans on their island on a psychological level. It's really hard for them to be criticized by the whole world because they are hosting refugees on their island, but it's also very exhausting for them to see these refugees suffering on their island. So that's the mood now, is that they are, but at the same time they are receiving money so they can buy foods. They are really struggling, and I think they think a lot about the future, and by thinking about the future they refer a lot to their name Pleasant Island. It's a name that a British whale hunter gave to them because their island was so beautiful, so full of nature, and they are all hoping to get their Pleasant Island back. And that's the mood they are feeling. They are feeling a bit of, like they are lost and they want to go back to that beautiful island, but now they don't know what to do. So they are doing something like hosting an offshore detention center. It's something that we don't want to do, but they try to survive, and that's a bit the mood there. They don't, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just to add quickly to that, it's also, I think, not entirely fair to put the entire agency of this political decision on the government of Nauru. Of course, the government of Australia is the main actor there. And it's also a question of, in this case, the history of Nauru shows very, very clearly what happens when you start the extraction of your natural resources. Once that ends, there are not a lot of possibilities anymore. And so ecological exhaustion leads to economical and also social exhaustion. That's just something that I wanted to add. They're also a victim of what happened to them in their history.
Thanks. Mm-hmm.
And just quickly, as to your question, if we're still in contact, we're still in contact with various people that we met on the island, both from the refugee community and from the native population of Nauru.
So I'm looking onto the YouTube chat again, and there's still some people watching actually, and there is one question for Patricia. Thank you. Patricia, do you have the feeling that your community needs more protection since you started this fight, or not more than before? How endangered are you since then?
Bueno, nosotros, mientras duró la lucha, que fue el proceso legal, que fue 10 años, teníamos dos tipos de protección. Judiciales dadas por la Comisión Interamericana y de la Corte Interamericana. Y aparte de eso, nos cuidábamos a nivel interno. Ahora es más complejo la situación porque como hay una sentencia internacional, la Corte da seguimiento también hasta que se cumpla totalmente.
During our fight and during the 10 years of lawsuit, we had two types of protection. One, the Inter-American Commission, on the other hand, the Inter-American Court. And of course, we took our own measures to protect ourselves. Now, as there is an international sentence, the International Court makes follow-up until all things contained in the sentence are fulfilled.
Sin embargo, varias mujeres amazónicas defensoras fuimos amenazadas de muerte. 4 mujeres incendiaron la casa de reuniones de las mujeres y hemos estado en permanente peligro, por lo que Amnistía Internacional y organizaciones de derechos humanos han alzado la voz para pedir nuestra protección. Hace 2 años yo fui amenazada de muerte directamente.
Yet several women from the Amazonian region have been menaced with death menaces. The women's meeting house has been burned down. That's why Amnesty International and other human rights organizations called out for better protection. And 2 years ago, I personally received a death menace as well.
El objetivo es que nosotros ya no hablemos, que callemos, que denunciemos. Y el peor error sería escondernos. Y no lo han logrado. Nosotros continuamos haciendo escuchar nuestra voz y denunciando.
They try to silence us, to make us stop, raise our voices. And the worst mistake we could commit is to hide, to go into hiding. We didn't. We still raise our voices and we make ourselves heard.
Creo que tienen más miedo a las mujeres defensoras activistas que a los mismos hombres, porque todas las amenazadas de muerte fuimos mujeres.
It seems they are more afraid of women activists, women fighters, than of men fighters, because the death menaces only went to women.
Okay, wow, that's a good word. Being afraid of the women protesting for their rights. Perhaps the last question from my side to Silke and Hannes. You said that the people you talked there on Nauru are in danger of being oppressed by the government because they talked with you. Did I understand it right? What is that? What does the oppression look like? Or do you know how those people were treated?
Well,
or can't you tell?
Not too much in detail, maybe, but just yeah, I think as you can imagine, an area of 4 by 5 kilometers is highly, and also with the interior part not being habitable because everything is mined out. So all the people live along the coastline. So everybody knows everybody more or less, and it's very quote unquote easy to single out someone and then take their passports, prohibit them from working on the island, or not letting them in or out the island. So basically, this is what that looks like.
This is what happened with some people that we met on the island. And a second thing that makes it difficult for them to do something against the government is because they are all related to each other. Everybody is related to each other. So when you fight against the government, you are fighting against your grandfather or your grandmother or your niece, or so it's so difficult there to. So I think that's maybe why they are not protesting a lot also, because it's so difficult. They are protesting against who? Against themselves. And it's so, yeah, it's very complex.
So I'm having a last look at, hey, there's a last question from the audience. Dear Patricia, again, thank you a lot for sharing your story. And then the question, do you feel like the movement of the indigenous people is supported by the rest of the Ecuadorian population? If yes, in what kind of way?
Ecuador es un país racista de alguna manera. Se ve no una equidad, aunque es un estado plurinacional constitucionalmente. Y la lucha de los pueblos indígenas ha servido para que nosotros podamos tener derechos, exigir derechos.
Ecuador is a racist country in some ways, even though our constitution contains the idea of plurinationalism. There is racism, and the fight of indigenous people has made it possible to claim our rights we otherwise would never have obtained.
Sin embargo, cuando hemos realizado movilizaciones a Quito, a denunciar y todo, sí hemos recibido una solidaridad de muchísima gente que sale a tratar de apoyar. Y la gente del pueblo, la gente de los que apoya con comida, que apoya para que podamos realizar las protestas. Y yo creo que eso hay que valorarlo.
But yet, when we try to mobilize, when we go to Quito, there is a solidarity. Many people have supported us. They go out with us. They give us food. They help us make our protests. So yes, there is some kind of support and solidarity.
Ecuador es un país que dentro de la Constitución tiene el buen vivir, los derechos de la naturaleza, pero que no se lo aplica en territorio.
The problem of Ecuador is that our constitution contains all these beautiful things of the rights of nature and plurinationalism, etc. But it's on the paper.
Well, thank you very much. Racism and solidarity, that's the perfect transition actually to our second part of the festival, which starts on Wednesday. But before we come to that, I'd like to thank you three, Patricia, Silke, and Hannes, for sharing your experiences with us, people watching you and talking with you. And very, very warm thank you to Doris for the translation, which really worked out well. We had really some major problems get things done correctly, and that worked really good, I guess. Thank you for being here. And well, what do you wish in such a moment? Good luck for keeping your voice raised and keeping the fight alive. Yeah, what can I say? Thank you very much. Perhaps Anita, you can add something.
Also from my side, it was a pleasure being part of this group here, and also knowing that there's some audience out there somewhere listening to us,
Yeah.
giving us feedback and some interesting aspects. And I just hope that we could contribute in strengthening our courage in speaking up. Thank you for participating.
Is there still room for one more question, or are we ending up the conversation?
We're a little bit ending up the conversation, but if you have an urgent question, you can ask, of course.
No, I was just wondering, since we're all coming behind our computer screen from Europe now, how Patricia also sees the relationship and the role of Europe within her struggle, because we know from experience in Brazil, a lot of the mining and oil companies have investors that are coming from Europe, that are European banks and companies. And not only in the present, but also in the past, of course, the histories have been intertwined of Europe and Ecuador through colonization. So I'm curious as to how she sees this relationship.
As a last question.
As a last question, but maybe it's quite broad.
Europa, Estados Unidos, la China y también Brasil, que es también una potencia en América del Sur. Son los que tienen las grandes empresas multinacionales y son también los responsables de cosas que pasa como en Nauru. La población europea o los de los países denominados capitalistas o del primer mundo tienen que empezar a presionar a sus gobernantes. El pueblo tiene que empezar a actuar porque también es responsabilidad de ellos todo lo que está pasando en Nauru o en el Amazonas o en otras partes del mundo donde tienen inversiones económicas.
The European Union, China, the United States, but also Brazil, an important nation within Latin America, all the multinational companies that have their seat and have their home in these countries are responsible for what is happening. And that's why people, civil society in Europe and in all these countries should pressure their governments, because everyone is responsible for what is happening in Nauru, what is happening in the Amazonian forest. That's what people in Europe should do.
Por lo tanto, no se salvan de la responsabilidad global, no se salvan de la responsabilidad ambiental, porque si destruyen los sitios tan preciosos como nuestro hábitat, como el Amazonas, imagínense que también destruyen la vida de ustedes. La destrucción de Nauru posiblemente nos está pasando factura con la crisis climática y posiblemente va a haber más problemas. Es tiempo de actuar, no es tiempo de quedarnos quietos. Así estén en Europa o estén en Canadá o en cualquier parte del mundo.
One cannot escape responsibility on a global level or on for ecology. You destroy your own life if you don't act. Nauru will pay back by climate crisis. You will notice what has happened to Nauru through ecological disasters, maybe through destruction. So wherever we are, we have to put up a fight.
Thank you.
And again, thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Silke and Hannes. Thank you, Doris, for the translation, and thank you, Anita, for asking questions and for cooperating. I'm switching to German shortly again. Wir beenden hiermit unsere kleine Reihe, die Natur gehört, in dem Fall die Natur gehört verteidigt. Dritter Teil. Wir beenden aber auch so ein bisschen den Themenschwerpunkt Ökologie, den wir jetzt übers Wochenende eigentlich seit Freitag sehr multiperspektivisch durchgezogen haben und kommen tatsächlich jetzt am Mittwoch, also übermorgen, mit Marc Terkessidis, wessen Erinnerung zählt, am Donnerstag mit Charlotte Wiedemann, der lange Abschied von der weißen Dominanz, und mit der Performance Schädel X zu einem Schwerpunkt innerhalb dieses Festivals, wo es tatsächlich auch noch viel stärker um Kolonialismus geht, um Rassismus und eben auch um Solidarität. Und ich freue mich sehr, wenn alle weiter gucken. Am Mittwoch geht es weiter um 20:30 Uhr. That was the advertisement for the festival, for all you others. And well, we stay together in that group for a little moment after we've switched off the YouTube channel. So bye-bye to everybody out there, and see you in the upcoming days. Bye-bye.
Ciao.